This is the fourth, wow, time flies, installment of our HWW grant-seeking brown bag workshop. And if you've if you've been joining us for the other three, we've had each of the Fridays in February. We've had a session. I first want to say thank you, and thank you for coming back. That's a wonderful gift that you're giving me. And we will have some, what we hope are very useful links for you today. If you are joining us for the first time, or if there's one of the series that you happen to miss, Peggy, our intrepid organizer, is going to debut a really nice resource. And she'll put it in the chat that has links to all of the videos from the previous sessions, as well as the slides and materials, and something that we're going to debut at the end of today, which is our RFP for our upcoming HWW grant round, which we're really excited. So we'll save some time today to actually look at that and talk through some of the exciting features if you're thinking about proposing, and do some Q&A around that as well. We will begin today's session, which is all about developing a funding strategy. My contact information is here if you have questions about anything that I say today. The theme that we'll be continuing from last week is, and that we started to talk about, as you might recall, is as your project moves forward in different phases, there are different things you find yourself in need of. And those can come in the shape of a few kinds of resources that you might go searching for to help move your project to the next level of development. So last week we talked all about those phases, and I'm hoping that today you have a working idea in your head about a project that you're interested in or working on right now, where it's at in a life cycle from proof of concept at one end to institutionalization and scaling to everyone on the other end, and all routes in between, and what it might take for that idea to move up that ladder. And that's what we're going to talk about with a little bit more specificity today. So hopefully by the time we're done, you have a sense of where you can go, not just to write one proposal, but to get lots of potential investors in your exciting idea, to pick up an idea that we talked about in session 2. Each week we do try to answer a question. And so here is the question we're focused on today. How can I attract sustained support for my work without selling out my goals and values? I often say without chasing money. We don't want to chase. You also don't want to be subject to someone else's RFP for moving your own idea or your own path to intellectual leadership, as we talked about in number 1, because you want to move your career in the direction that matters to you and work on the ideas and goals that you have. And so the effort here is to think about how you can attract support for your work rather than chase the next opportunity that happens to come along. There's one big rule. I'm going to come back to this over and over and over again. And I know we have some fabulously successful grant seekers on the call today, and so I'm sure that all of them will relate to this. But this is often something that takes folks a little bit by surprise, and I'll talk about why. Not really in terms of the sense of it, but in terms of just how difficult it can be to make this commitment. The Academy doesn't make it easy for us to make this commitment all the time. I'll just say it that way. But here's rule number 1. You must invest in your own work. And so often that means you have to say, this is my top priority for the next little bit of time. So let me take you to a scene from a pre-pandemic era where I'm sitting in my office. It's one of the best parts of my job as Associate Dean for Research. I get to meet with faculty to talk strategy with them about how their career as a researcher or as a creative artist, as a scholar of various types, might unfold over the next little bit of time. Maybe they're brand new, and we're talking about what are the first 3 years of life at MSU look like. Maybe they've just gotten tenure and they're over that hump and they're like, now what am I supposed to do? uh, and this is often the sticking point. They'll often have a lot of great ideas. And one of the things I'm eager to ask them is, which one are you willing to invest the next 2 years of your career in? And that's where maybe you can start to feel your own pulse quicken a little bit. In session 2, I talked about this word invest. And we'll talk in a minute about what you might have to invest. But I also mean, where are you going to put on your own t-shirt and wear it around? Because the first thing that people are going to ask or are going to pick up on if you're asking them for something is, well, what do you got in this, right? They want to see earnest money on the table. And so I think that's part of the equation. So we'll come back to this idea in a little bit, but I want you to remember it because it's often the thing that's in your direct control. And I'm not making light of how tough it can sometimes be to choose what your top priority is. There's a little risk involved in saying I'm going to focus on this and not this other thing. Okay, so what else could you ask for? That's what we're going to focus on first, and it's going to be the subject of our first little conversation, which we're going to try this week, I think, as a large group. I'm going to show you a list. And I have 2 questions that I want you to consider with regard to every project you've worked on. I don't claim that this list is exhaustive, but it's pretty close when it comes to academic projects. That is, almost everything you need fits into one of these categories. And so I want you to think about this as your generic shopping list for scholarly work, artistic work, whatever it might be, creative projects. Generally speaking, here's where I'm coming from on this. Part of my other job in the dean's office is I look at every single budget that goes out for every request for a grant, a fellowship, internal, external, large, small, doesn't matter. I look at them all, and with my pre-award research administrator, we make sure that everything adds up. So I see these budgets every single day, and it's my job to go yes, or to send it back and go, I don't know. Are you sure you have asked for everything you need to be successful? As the academic on the side, that's what I'm looking at. I'm saying, do they have what they need to succeed? Are they asking for the right things in the right amounts from the right people? From your point of view, the questions can be simplified to these. What do you need to get your project to the next level? And who has it? So if you put your project here, these are the things. You need time. How much? Time is the sine qua non, right? If nobody is willing to allocate time to the effort, it's not going to get done. You can have all these other things below, and without that, forget it. Expertise, you might need it. You might need to get it. You might need to develop it. With enough time, you can practice your way into some things that you don't know enough about. You can even write grants to learn some things. There's a great Mellon program called New Directions. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that program. It's an explicit program. Its aim is to help scholars who want to work in a new area pause the rest of their life and go retrain, as it were, even to the point of getting an additional credential or degree. We had a person in our college who PhD in linguistics has worked now to earn an undergraduate degree in computer science. Fascinating. use the mill in new direction. So with sufficient time, you can develop expertise you don't currently have, or you can get it faster, maybe by partnering with someone. Um, Connections and referrals often those are crucial. Um, they might not actually cost very much, but they involve um, building relationships of trust. Maybe you need feedback. Maybe you have an idea and you need to know, is this any good or am I on the right track? Maybe you need some commodities. Space, pretty pretty tough. Space is an interesting one in my world right now because pre-COVID it was the most precious commodity on the campus. Today, you can have it. Nobody's in their space. Um, Consumables, that is, maybe you're a painter and you need paint. Um, or maybe you're having a big meeting and you need to feed people. We used to do that. Maybe we'll do that again. And then finally, of course, money. Now, I put money at the bottom of the list for a reason. Money will often be a faster pathway to the other things on the list, but unlike time, it's the least important. You can have a bunch of money and still not get the project done. You have to trust me on this one, but if there are other people on the list who've worked in the dean's office, I know Antoinette will know this, Jason will know this, as running a large project. People give a lot of money back to funding agencies because they don't use it. That hurts my soul, first of all. That should never happen. But my point being, money ain't going to buy you the motivation to do the work if you don't have the time to do the work, right? So, money is useful, but it is also got the narrowest um, sort of range of use of all the other things. What do you need and who has it? Let's look at one example. As you'll know, I've pitched this whole workshop series as uh, one that is more pragmatic, I hope, than some others. I don't only want to talk to you. I want to give you ways to practice, and so you'll need to take these into your life after this brown bag, and really use it in order to get the value out of it. But I'm going to show you how to practice today, and then we'll do a little bit together, and then you'll have to go away and practice on your own. But like normal, like a cooking show, I have one in the oven ready to come out, golden brown, delicious. Let's look at one. So this is a project that came to me in my role as associate dean um, from a really innovative art faculty member who does conceptual and installation art and works at the intersection of art and science. The project, we'll call it Green and Green, the bioremediation of arsenic paint and painting. So some of you may be familiar with this historical fact that the pigments that were used to make green paint for quite a long time and throughout some of the more consequential times in the history of Western art used arsenic in order to achieve the green color. And famously, that's one of the thoughts about how Napoleon either died or went crazy or both. He had a lot of this green pigment in his walls because of the wallpaper. I don't know the truth of that. Maybe if a historian could help me with that. However, it is true that that is the case. And so this artist had an idea of doing a conceptual piece of what it would take to bioremediate, that is, to use organic, in this case, living organisms, bacteria, and yeasts, to convert the toxins in arsenic pigments, and to do so in a way that cause chemical changes. On the one hand, it renders the toxins inert and safe. On the other hand, it changes their color. So the interesting dynamic here is to show the painting that's green and to show a painting that's green, right? Cool project, right? Interesting idea, timely, etc. What does this person need and who has it? Wow. So I had never really seen a project list that included some of these items. And that's why I like to show them to you, because time he had, and he was willing to dedicate his time and the time of one other person and a scientist who he worked with. But they had some needs that don't usually come from the art department and that we had to actually do some creative work to figure out how to get. Um, he needed expertise, a molecular biologist, to develop the cultures to do the bioremediation or to teach him how to do it. Turns out he needed some connections and referrals in order to receive a critical component, which is space. Because the materials that he was using in order to figure out if the toxicity was actually lowering involved radioisotopes. So he needed a wet lab that had the proper security and safety equipment to handle both the toxic materials to begin with, which involved ventilation and hoods and all of that kind of stuff, and then to apply the radioisotope test to determine the toxicity. You could see you're way out of my expertise already, right? But this was a pretty unique challenge. Now, these facilities exist on a campus of a research university like MSU, and it turns out we have a facility that actually makes these radioisotopes, and so we are much more likely to get them than some others. But it wasn't a done deal because it was unheard of that an artist would go looking for them and asking for them, right? So the questions that arise from this conversation is, how do I do one of these as a test? I have an idea on paper. I think it can work. I've gotten the right feedback so far to determine that chemically it should be valid. Now we need to run a few tests to make sure the bioremediation can actually succeed. I want to get to that proof of concept phase, and for that I need these things. I don't need to move in there permanently, but I need a biologist, a wet lab, and some radioisotopes to run a test for me. How do I do that? That makes sense? What that lets us do is write a very targeted and interesting and fascinating proposal. I love seeing these kind of proposals. They're the ones that people can't lay off of because they're like, wait, what? Oh, yeah, I want to see that happen. And so the scientists were interested in it. The artists were interested in it. It represented a really great collaboration, which some offices on our campus are always interested in facilitating. And it also required very little money, it turns out. I mean, we had to buy some materials, but most of this stuff was just an approval to do what they wanted to do. So I want you to practice what my colleague and friend Adam went through in putting this list together. You'll notice that his list is limited. It only got 3 things on it for this level because he didn't need to ask for these other things to get his idea from off of paper and into proof of concept. So that's another key element here. So what's on your list to get your project to the next level? How many of these slots do you need to ask someone for? Here's our sharing time. I'm going to give you a minute. Again, we're not going to go to breakout groups. We're going to kind of stay in small groups. But I want you to fill out a shopping list for yourself. I'm going to stop my screen share in a minute. So if you want to write these down, time, expertise, connections or referrals, feedback, space, consumables, and money. What do you need and who has it? And of course, you can expand that question out to what do you need to take your project from where it is now to the next step? All of those help you write a really compelling, tightly focused proposal. When we come back to the conversation, I'm going to prompt you for these two answers as well. What are the opportunities for you to invest? Where are you the answer to who has it? And then where do you depend on others, or where will you need to involve someone else? That's harkens back to the conversation we had last week about this is an idea bigger than me because I need a molecular biologist now. Who knew that that's what I was going to need when I first started going to art school? But turns out that's where we are. So let me stop my share. And if everyone just we can sit in silence a moment, unless you have a clarification question. But I think we'll stay in large groups, and feel free to pull up the slides. Peggy has made those available so that you can see them. And then I'll prompt you in a minute to share your shopping list with us.
Bill, can I ask a question?
Sure thing. Go ahead, Teresa.
I'm not sure what consumables are.
Oh yeah, so that's anything that you use up. So anything, and food is literally a consumable. So these are things that would appear on your budget that you're asking for money for, that over the course of the project are going to be used up. So for artists have lots of them because they make things and they use materials to make things. Scholars tend to have fewer of them. Other kinds of scholars tend to have fewer consumables on the list. They might have copy paper or toner. But for certain kinds of projects, they're really important. I see someone talked about wanting a course buyout, and that can be really important because creating the time you need is key. But one of the things that's also very comes from the point of view of your funding agency, and this is true of foundations like Mellon, but also especially of federal agencies, the government agencies that we ask for money. If you're in a research appointment, they know quite well that you have 40% of your effort is allocated to research already. And so this point that I made about wearing your own T-shirt, like NSF generally won't buy someone out of a course ever, because what they're expecting is that you're going to allocate the 40% that you're already paid to do that work. And they'll even ask for a document called current and pending to make sure that you're not over allocated, because they also don't want you promising something that you can't deliver. That is part of the bargain of being a research faculty member. And that's difficult for some of us because we're trying to make conceptual space as well, allowing things to compete for our time and attention. But when it comes to putting that on a budget, it can be very hard to persuade those who are granting money and for whom your institution and others will recover elements of your salary. They're like, you're already paid to do that. And so that can be one of the hard lessons about wearing your own T-shirt. They're saying, I don't see your 40% on the table. That's 2 days a week in a 5-day work week. That's not me trying to be a crack the whip. That is me talking to you about the logic that these funders already have when they're looking at and with Mellon, a place that we see that is a constraint is that they won't pay for tuition for graduate assistants. You might have seen that. And that's because they feel like that's our responsibility. So part of part of what you're dealing with when you're asking other people for resources is that discussion about values, who should do what, and then who is willing to commit what. Um, so there is a gesture there that says, um, I'm putting this in, and I'm asking you for this other thing.
Thank you, Bill. My name is Christina Stanton. I'm the new director of the Humanities Research Center at VCU. And I'm working on several projects, probably a grant with a partner who is in the consortium already at Northwestern, but I'm thinking of a broader project of short talks or initiatives privileging the humanities or giving some I don't know how to phrase this exactly. I'm on a campus where the medical campus takes most of the resources, and the humanities don't have a presence or as big a presence as I'd like. So I'm looking for both ideas for promoting the humanities and also for partnering with other institutions who might do similar advocacy work. I'm at Research One University.
I'm between two departments in a second language studies and in a humanities in a language department. So I sort of see this push and pull often also. And somebody that we had come and talk for us was with the Humanities Initiative at Georgetown University, Nicoleta Piredu. I can put it in the chat. But she's doing really great work, and she actually talks a lot about the collaborations that they have through this Humanities Initiative with the med school, the School of Engineering, with language departments, of course, but with some places that you wouldn't naturally, normally maybe think of collaborating with. So she might be somebody to reach out to. I know she had really great ideas, and I can share her talk with you if you give me your email.
That'd be great. Thank you, Megan.
Let me be a little opportunistic, because those kinds of encounters that Megan just talked about are really helpful. Going into them, it's really helpful to have your shopping list ready, because part of what that enables is for you to make a very small, targeted, focused ask of that person of something they have that they might be able to contribute, as well as something that you have that you might be able to contribute to them.
I see that Claire Francis is here, my colleague at Iowa. And one of the things Claire and I talked about a little bit, I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, Claire, but we were thinking about what would be a way to think with people in different language departments about the future of language study through literature on campuses, since we know those departments are being reformed constantly, being cut constantly. And we were trying to imagine what kind of a collaboration or a project could be an intellectual argument for, which is in some ways about the future of humanities, but especially around language and literature in other languages.
Just answered a little bit in the chat, Teresa. Timing is great on this. I attended a panel earlier this morning via YouTube in an event that is being hosted on my campus called the Comic Arts Forum, and it was a group of folks who are using visual and comic arts to do exactly that. So they're kind of co-facilitated or co-taught by folks who are on the cultural studies side and on the language side. And the projects that the students are doing, both the text they read and the things they make, are visual, like literal comic books, comic histories. And what that does is a couple of really important things. So we heard a presentation on Japanese manga for that purpose. It gives even the most novice language learners in Japanese a window on the cultural expression and a way to participate in the interpretation of those texts, even as they start to gain beginner level language skills. But it also provides a space for the more advanced language students to help the other learners as well. And so Those visual genres are really interesting in that regard. And so I think there's a cool set of projects to be done around that, demonstrating that range, perhaps. So, how was how was this exercise? Let me ask folks, how did it feel to put that list together? Are you able to see a way to keep your lists short and focused the same way you do when you go to the grocery store for making a meal versus shopping for the next 6 months? Are you able to see how you can uh, put a list of requests together, perhaps to help your project move from one area to the other? I have another bit to show you, and hopefully this unlocks the aha moment of today's presentation. I think this shopping list is pretty useful. So this might be one of your key takeaways. And I hope that you'll use it the next time that you build a budget. And in fact, I think this is a useful way to start your next grant proposal, to be honest with you. The grid that I gave you in episode 2 helps you pull your idea together so that you know what your idea is that others might invest in. And that activities box in the lower left ought to correspond with a list like this, 1-to-1. Meaning, your reviewers should be able to see you've asked for the resources to get that activities list done. And that's really what makes a proposal persuasive. Oh, I see they're asking for what they need and only what they need to do exactly what they say they're going to do. Awesome. Right? Moving on. Let's see how we can say yes to this proposal. Those are the proposals you want to say yes to as a reviewer. But as a seeker after funding, it does something else for you, and that is, here's the other key takeaway I hope that you'll have today. I don't want you to just have one shot. You're not Alexander Hamilton. You're not Johnson & Johnson. Not one shot. You want to have multiple opportunities. You want to see a number of ways that you can get support for your project. So you're not chasing, you're watching for opportunities. If you have your list together, you don't have to get all the things you need from one source, right? And in fact, over time, you can be patient. You can say, well, we're here now, we're at proof of concept, and we want to get to efficacy test. Does it work? I know I need these things to get there. I'm going to use 2 opportunities because that increases my chances that each of them will say yes if I'm asking in a very targeted way. And I'm going to show you a couple pathways for that right now. So I'm going to share my screen one more time. And hopefully you'll never go back to thinking about a single proposal again once you see this one. So here are the 2 funding pathways that are most common to pursue. And I'm going to give you the spoiler up front. The idea is to never be on only one of them. That if you have a fundable idea, you want to keep both pathways open to you. So the left side represents competitions. So these are grant proposals, internal or external, competitions, awards, fellowships, where you know that you have to have the best proposal to win and or be above the pay line compared to other proposals. The fundable idea expectations for that look a lot like what we have talked about before, where you take the idea from an idea on paper to proof of concept, from proof of concept to trial. Does it work? To implementation. Does it work in the real world? To training or teach other people how to do this. Expanding, implementing beyond your own institution, institutionalization. what I say is what your funders expect is that if you're asking for resources here at implementation, let's say, and you haven't done a trial, you're going to fail. Let's say you do want to have a vaccine. If you're asking for a rollout to start vaccinating people, they're going to ask, does your vaccine work? It's pretty important, right? The same idea is true if you're making art. If you're asking to hang a show of 17 paintings that have been bioremediated with radioisotopes, they're going to say, wait, does it work? Have you done one? Let's see it, right? So this life cycle that we talked about all of a sudden is no longer only about helping your idea develop and get better. It's still about that. But if you're in a competitive situation, the people who can demonstrate that they've moved along this pathway are going to beat you every time if you haven't done it. And so that's really key. And I think that is often missed because a lot of folks, when they first start writing grant proposals, they think that this wins. No, this is just the beginning. This is how you win. You ask for the right support at the right phase, and that's it. So another rookie mistake in the competition lane is people ask for or promise too big of a leap. And so your reviewers will look at that and they go, cool idea, but you're ahead of yourself. Go back to the drawing board. Whereas the team that has a track record and can show that they're past proof of concept, they have some successful evidence and are ready for a trial, will get the yes every time. So that's the competition funding pathway. And I hope that you can see how it unites the list of resources that you asked for with the project lifecycle we talked about last week. Simultaneously, and just as important, is what I call the relationship building pathway. It also starts with a fundable idea. And this represents funding sources like foundations, sometimes for fellowships or grants, but also it takes you into a whole other world of partnerships, even donors, even development, right? Often to get all the way up the chain to institutionalization, you actually have to get past people who are just doing grants or startup kinds of work. You actually need someone who will endow something for the long term. So you might need a donor for this sort of thing. Notice that your pathway here, your expectations of funders is different. And in some ways it can feel a little less formal, but I don't want you to think that the evidence is any less high stakes. So where you begin with a fundable idea and you want to talk to somebody in, I don't know, the Kellogg Foundation, they don't have open calls or competitions. They tell you what their funding priorities are, and then they invite you to have a conversation. That often begins by writing, but pretty soon you're in a dialogue back and forth, whether it's happening, it's usually a combination of conversations that happen orally and in writing. And then they want a demonstration. It's a little like a trial, but they're like, well, show us what you mean. Show us that you've done this before or that you could do it again. Then you might be willing, or they might be willing, to support an implementation approach. And this is pretty similar. Now, this is where the paths look very similar. And then institutionalization is the last thing. So let's imagine here that your fundable idea is to replace monuments on campus that have ties to discriminatory practices and legacies with new monuments on campus. I believe Mellon and Kellogg are working together on a project like that. And it starts with an idea. Okay, here's the one we have. We'd like to build a whole different thing. Talk to us about it. Now show us a model, show us a sample, show us a drawing. And now let's make one. And then let's talk about what it would take to put one on the campus that's permanent, that's going to last 100 years. Is this making sense?
Yes, we're coming up toward the end, and I know some people came to have a sneak peek at the CFP, so I don't know, I don't want to divert you, but I just thought I'd give you a 12-minute warning bell.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm going to hit that at, I got 2 more minutes. I'm going to wrap it up. My admonition at the beginning of this was, I want you to always think about being on both pathways if you can. You want to compete for funding where you need to, but you also want to build relationships for support where you can. Your own university is a great source of that. And then you want to cultivate others. So we're going to wrap up here, and then we're going to get a look at the RFP. What is a good funding strategy? What is your t-shirt like? You want to have multiple options in both funding pathways open to you at all times so that you're ready to go. The best way to do that is to know what you need, know who has it, know how to ask for it, just what you need at just the right time. The cool thing about that is that you'll see that as you move forward, you'll create new fundable ideas as you move others through the life cycle. So you'll want to keep a little file because those ideas proliferate, especially as you come in contact with other people who have their ideas. Seek only the investments you need at the appropriate stage for your own good, but also because that's what's competitive. And also, don't chase money, attract investors. Think about it that way. Think about getting other people, printing more t-shirts, getting other people to wear that t-shirt. All right, and so with that, we are at the 10 minutes to go, and we're going to get a sneak peek. I'm going to stop, and maybe Peggy, you might want to do the share on this one.
So I think it's probably easier to have people look at the PDF, which I just put in the chat. I think sharing might be a little overwhelming, I think, with the text.
Okay, great. Antoinette, do you want to say a few words of debut?
So this is our call, and we have spent a long time working on it, as you might imagine, and we've got a lot of input from some people on this call as well. And just to reiterate, the chief idea here is that whatever your research topic is, what we're really interested in is hearing about and seeing you demonstrate your strategies for reciprocity and redistribution. That is to say, how you're going to take that research idea, embed it in a variety of multi-sited spaces, and build it up around equitable partnerships that are also socially just and racially diverse. So whatever it is you work on, if it's Beowulf or medical humanities or, de-arsenified paintings, I can't remember what the word you used there was, Bill. How is it that you're going to take that research project, build it collaboratively with others, circulate it in the world, and produce something that models the best kinds of critical reciprocity and redistribution, because that method recruits underrepresented minority folks and also redistributes all the assets that you have to share. So we just had the first couple pages, bioremediated, there you go. But I think you can see from those first couple pages how heavily we're leaning into reciprocity and redistribution as a way of surfacing it as a set of methods and strategies for doing the kind of transformative, anti-racist, and socially just work that we're really interested in promoting.
Yeah, and as we kind of hinted last week, it's exciting for us because this is this is an RFP that leaves your topics quite broadly open, but asks you to work in a particular sort of way that exhibits these qualities within the project. And so there's a way in which it offers procedural guidance as opposed to conceptual.
I have found it really inspiring. I know it's challenging because it asks us to do the work, our groups to do the work of really imagining where a good research topic intersects with these larger kind of values-based challenges. So I think it is one of those grants that you have to sit and ponder, you have to get together with a group and brainstorm about, maybe even more than most, but I see that as a good thing.
Yeah, I think to put it in the terms that I mentioned earlier, I think it does ask a lot of the researchers in terms of what they're willing to invest of their own effort and their own scholarly work. And I think that'll be the challenge: is can you put on paper some compelling evidence that you're willing to work this way? Because I think the projects that will succeed, I suspect, will convince the reviewers that they can. Maybe because they have, maybe because of the people they put together, maybe because the idea and the opportunity are just too good to not work that way. So I think there are a lot of ways to get to that compelling statement, but I suspect that those are the projects that will prevail. With full disclosure that I won't be I won't be judging them, but that would be what I would coach someone to do.
I guess on apropos of Bill's earlier remark about you seek partners in order to have access to expertise that you don't already have, I think that this is a very good example of a call that requires you to stretch your definition of what you know, or to think about, I guess, the limits of what you know, and seek partners who can help you actually change up that knowledge, or even challenge that knowledge in order to make it more reciprocal and less kind of already decided. So this is very much a kind of project that comes into being, I think, through those encounters and collaborations, and the knowledge you think you had. I don't know why we're referring to Beowulf, but because it seems in some ways the most off-piste, potentially. I know for the literary folks here that won't be true, but when you think about any topic, you have a kind of modicum of knowledge about it, but how are you going to engage others who bring different dimensions to that into the conversation, so that what you think you know about it actually ends up being transformed through its exposure to and collision with other forms of knowledge making in other kinds of settings.
I'm just going to say that I think the emphasis on the methods will require a kind of more careful thinking and before the proposal about how the work will be done, and what each constituent in the work is contributing, and how what are your goals and outcomes and how they will be distributed. So I think that it's not the normal way. It's not the normal topical way to put together a grant, but I actually think it will generate grants that are better thought out in advance, and projects that are better thought out and more comprehensively thought out in advance.
I was thinking today about if there are analogs to it that I know of, and the closest I could come to is the ACLS Digital Extension Program. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but it asks for projects that have had some success as traditional scholarly projects, but could reach a broader audience or have more impact in the digital realm. And so it's a lot of folks look at that and they go, what? So it asks for projects at a particular step and for scholars who are ready to take that step. And if it's not you, it doesn't call to you at all. And I think this one will have some elements of that. That is, this one will call to people who are at a moment and who are motivated in particular ways to take their scholarship in this direction. And for others, I think it will be perfectly fine for them to say, this is not my path right now. I'm going to apply for NEH summer fellowship and write my book, which would be okay, right? That might be the place where they need to be.
Although I am an opponent of us and them dichotomies, I want to say that, but I think of this as a project, unlike prior projects I've done, that is less me and us centered and more them centered. The them is at the center. It's less about building my capacity as a scholar and more about building community capacities. So that's how I read that call.
Well,
Thanks.
and my kind of version of thinking about that, Louise, that's really helpful is, I guess, and again, I'm like Bill, I won't be choosing projects. So I can say this as a speculative comment, not a requirement, but I would love to see people take what they're working on in individual research and really try to think how that connects with some large movements in the humanities. So, on a number of our campuses, people are working on prison issues in the humanities. People are working on environmental humanities, healthcare and humanities. And it's not that the projects need to fit in those slots, but I would hope that some of the projects would move people forward in creative new ways on, justice issues and the humanities. So I hope that people will be thinking about that intersection between here's what I'm working on, but with other people, here's how I could connect it to this larger movement that I see as critical for the humanities.
I mean, in that sense, Christina, it's, why the humanities matter writ large, right? I mean, it's everything you are saying is this is a vehicle for that in a very particular kind of way.
Absolutely. Thank you. I love the description, and especially turning to the humanities to bring the most compelling questions of our time, right, to the attention of our colleagues and also of our peers. I mean, this is a very generous call for papers, so I appreciate it.
And also to do it, I think, in a way that stretches us, particularly in the legacy departments in the humanities, where this kind of reciprocal redistributive work may not be the norm. And so I do hope that it pushes more, as I think Teresa's saying, this pushes more of us toward a informed, publicly engaged kind of research going forward. I mean, we're really interested in changing the world here and transforming the institutions that we work in so that it is humanities without walls. I mean, we abbreviate it a lot now because it's more convenient, but I think we do want to move across those boundaries and make them more porous. But we also recognize that we are a little bit fortress humanities sometimes, even despite the best of our intentions. And so trying to think about how to build truly reciprocal relationships into the very project design, that's really important to us. It's not in this version that you'll see, but it's in the larger version. We have a bunch of do's and don'ts at the end of the CFP. How to engage graduate students as equals, how not to. How to invite community members into conversation, how not to. And we've worked with our colleague, Jenny Davis, in American Indian Studies here, who works in anthropology and in indigenous communities and teaches on ethical methods to try and really think about what some of those practices might look like, which again, I think many of us are not accustomed to, and we're especially not accustomed to imagining communities being sites of knowledge production that are equivalent to our own, if not better. and especially when it comes to grand challenges, which they, as we know, live the preconditions and the real-time conditions of as well. So
Yeah, that's a great point, Antoinette. And I would say this too, and apropos to what we talked about today. I don't think it's a waste of anyone's time who is interested in doing that kind of work to start with the proposal for this RFP, because a project that was funded here at the proof of concept phase would be a amazing contender for something like the Just Futures at a larger scale, for a $3 million, $4 million, $5 million project from Mellon. And we saw similar RFPs to Just Futures from Kellogg and the Carnegie Foundation this year as well. So lots of folks are thinking about this kind of project from humanists and artists, among others. So I think it's a good investment of your time if you want to see a project like that grow too. We're a little bit over time, so I'm happy. I don't have anything immediately pressing my time, but I want to thank you all, for especially all of you who came for each of the 4 sessions. We hope to have this material available to you and to your colleagues in a number of formats, and most immediately you'll get to see the. Am I back?
You're back.
So stay tuned. We hope to create something reusable and useful in this series, and we thank you for your feedback and time.
thank you so much, Bill Hart-Davidson, man of the hour. Awesome.
Thank you.
Man of 4 hours, in fact. Thanks, everybody.